I recently saw a tweet, not that long ago, or earlier today, talking about how somebody was talking about how, like, this game shouldn't be a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 because of performance issues the game has. And my thought process when I first heard that was like, you do realize that the game isn't the one at fault, right? There's a difference between the game having bad performance compared to the game being really good, but it's limited by the hardware it's on. And Tears of the Kingdom is literally that. Tears of the Kingdom is limited by the hardware it is currently on. Several frame drops that happen throughout the game, specifically when it's in surrounded areas, surrounded, you know, sections of the game. Specifically when you have these guys around with you, and sometimes whenever you light something on fire, it bursts into flame, there's wind everywhere, and then you glide down somewhere, maybe when it's raining, lightning, stuff like that, you see a lot of frame dropping. It's pretty bad, but it doesn't ruin the immersion that you have with the game, because the game, aside from that, is really polished in a lot of ways. And a lot of the stuff has been severely optimized in order for this game to fit perfectly well. Recently, Aonuma, the director and the producer of The Legend of Zelda, came out and said that the game was actually finished a year ago, but what they did is that they delayed it to this year because they wanted to basically work on the performance, you know, the technical aspect of the performance, to make sure everything works properly, which is something that a lot of gaming companies do not do. A lot of gaming companies tend to just release it and be like, yeah, we'll fix it later when it's released. Day 1 patch, day 90 patch, you know, that kind of stuff. And then it tends to lead to, you know, people complaining about the game's performance. The game is crap. The game is severely, you know, bad. Best case point example is recently the new Star Wars game. Apparently, when even when you ran the game on like a really powerful PC, it barely held on to the frame rate. Like, the performance for it was really terrible. It was not optimized properly for a PC. I don't know what it was like on console, but it was terribly optimized for PC. You know, that is the game's fault. It is the developer and the game itself. That is an example of the game being the issue. I believe it was from, what was his name? Anonymous Gamer? No Ordinary Gamer. I think that was... he did a video on it, talking about how, like, his PC is really, really fucking, like, strong. And he was getting performance issues, right? That is the game's fault. That is not a hardware issue. However, I will say this: Resident Evil 4 Remake, the recent one that just came out, which is one of my favorite fucking games this year, and possibly one of my favorite Resident Evil games of all time right now, it had issues. It had issues even on the beefiest of PCs to have a steady frame rate. I tried maxing out my graphics card to its best potential, and it would go under 60 frames per second. And it would be bad. That would be a Capcom thing. That would actually be a developer thing. That they didn't optimize it very well for, like, high resolution graphics for, like, maybe a good PC. Because I think at the end of the day, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the game was optimized for the PS5. It wasn't optimized for PC, but for PS5. And there's also the thing with the RE engine having issues with lighting on PC for whatever reason. There's, like, people have mentioned this before, with other Resident Evil games that came out on PC, that there's an issue with RE Engine on PC for some reason. But when people complain about the performance issues of Legend of Zelda, in terms of the frame rate, I personally do not fault the game at all. It is not the game's fault that the performance is as bad as it is. You're talking about a game that's literally on a fucking really, really shitty, the best way to compare it to is like a 2010's mobile phone. That's what this Switch is. And I don't know if you can hear it. You cannot. But whenever I play this Tears of the Kingdom on the Switch, that shit fucking rooms. The fan just goes woo. Even after I cleaned it, the Switch goes like woo, trying to play this fucking game. So it's like, so it's not the game's fault that you're getting the frame rate issues. It's not that. They probably tried everything they possibly could to optimize it, but it just was impossible with the hardware that they were basically making it for. The reason why Breath of the Wild barely had any frame rate issues when it first came out, because that game was basically made for the Wii U. Then they just optimized it for the Switch. Basically, you know, they gave better enhancement. They probably made better environments. They did graphically everything better for the Switch. But even though there's one section in Breath of the Wild that, you know, causes a fuck up. But that's because it's such a dense area with a lot of leads, a lot of stuff happening. But other than that, it was perfectly well run. The reason why Tears of the Kingdom isn't running as well as Breath of the Wild is because they literally pushed the Switch to the limit and tried to optimize it the best they could in order to make it run smoothly. But that didn't help at the end of the day because, again, the Switch is the problem. Right? The Switch was the issue. So, blaming the game for the issues that, because of the hardware that it's on, I feel is misleading. You shouldn't blame the game for issues that the hardware has. And I think a lot of people who basically talk about how like the performance is bad for the game are doing it based on the fact that it's just the game's fault. It's not the fact that the Switch is just so badly fucking... It's just really badly underpowered for this game. It truly is. And, you know, Nintendo doesn't want to release a new pro console, a new powerful console for whatever reason. Mostly, if I had to guess why, it's probably because, you know, Switch is still making a lot of money, so why the fuck should they? Right? So at the end of the day, you shouldn't blame the game for the performance issues. What you should blame is the fact that the Switch is just underpowered and then Nintendo didn't want to release an actual powerful console to help with maybe what they could have done is possibly release a new Switch Pro in line with Tears of the Kingdom so that Tears of the Kingdom could run better. Right? But at the end of the day, it is not Tears of the Kingdom's fault for some of the performance issues. It's literally because the Switch is underpowered. And even after all that, even with some of the frame rate issues, everything else is superbly polished. Like, the game runs really, really well. Like, you could complain about, you know, how, like, the graphics are probably not, like, the best, you know? But at the end of the day, it's like, there's a reason for that. They optimize it. They probably lessen or lower the quality of, like, the environment of, like, you know, like, the ground and stuff like that to make sure it runs well on the Switch. It's a sacrifice they had to make. I guarantee you, if they had a choice, they would gladly make this game look fucking beautiful. And the game still looks beautiful. Don't get me wrong, the game looks so beautiful. Me personally, I just don't find the blame in the game. I find the blame on the console. And that is a Nintendo problem that is way different than the actual team that worked on it. Because the team did a really good job on optimizing this shit. And I just wanted to rant and talk about it because there was I saw a Twitter post about it and I was just like, no, you have to realize that there's a difference between a game being bad and being bad performance-wise to the console just being underpowered and, you know, the developers doing everything they could to make sure it just worked well, you know? And that's exactly what it is with Tears of the Kingdom. I'm not, like, you know, I'm a Nintendo fanboy. I'm not afraid to admit that. I love Nintendo games. I've loved Nintendo games ever since I was a fucking kid. If I know that the Switch can handle a certain game, the developers just don't want to optimize it, then I will say about it. The best example is Pokemon Sword and Scarlet. Pokemon Sword and Scarlet, like, it was just not optimized well at all. You could say the same. It could be the same thing as Tears of the Kingdom, but at least Tears of the Kingdom is fucking polished. You don't see a lot of glitches. You don't see a lot of things like, you know, going into walls, just wilding out everywhere, like heads being turned and shit like that. You don't see that often. With so yeah, it's like Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. Yeah, Pokemon. I think I said Pokemon Scarlet, Pokemon Sword. My fault. Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet. That is a developer issue. That is not a hardware issue because I guarantee you, aside from maybe using so many Pokemon in the game, I guarantee you that fucking game could have been better optimized to make sure those glitches don't happen. And I will say also one other thing about that is that the developers also didn't have a lot of time. I think it probably was like 2-3 years between Sword and Shield and Scarlet Violet, so maybe they did have time. But like at the end of the day, they had a chance to like fix any issues, you know? I think at the end of the day, it's you could argue that it was the Switch's fault too for Pokemon Scarlet Violet. But look at this game. It's polished. I understand the argument that this game probably had more time in development, so maybe it's not a fair example. And that might be the case. That maybe if Pokemon Scarlet and Violet had a more time in development, maybe the game would have been better. and not as glitchy, right? But at the same time, developers always have the opportunity to basically delay a game, but most refuse to do so because, well, money. They want to release a new game as fast as possible to make more money, even though Pokemon is the richest property in the goddamn world. But there's also other stuff like trying to tie it with the anime and merchandising and stuff like that. The Pokemon Company just, I think, at the end of the day, needs to slow down everything and not like follow a huge fixed schedule. So yeah, at the end of the day, I don't blame Tears of the Kingdom for the performance issues it has. I blame just that the Switch is severely underpowered for it to properly handle the amount of stuff that they did with this game. I just wanted to rant about that just because I saw that Twitter post. My apologies for ranting.